Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Exchange 2013 Unified Messaging. Unified Messaging was released as a separate server role with Exchange 2007, and the Unified Messaging services have been enhanced with each service pack and each major release. Unified Messaging provides for a universal inbox of email, voicemail, and, if configured, incoming faxes. So in this lesson, we're going to explore the various telephony pieces that have to be in place in order for unified messaging to work, and we'll discuss and demonstrate how to configure unified messaging on your Exchange server, as well as how to enable your end users to utilize unified messaging. Okay, so let's get started. As mentioned, Unified Messaging, it's built into the mailbox server role to provide for a universal inbox of email, voicemail, and incoming fax. Now, it wasn't always done this way. Now, originally, Unified Messaging was a separate server role. But now, having it built right into the mailbox server, it actually gets installed when you install a mailbox server. So there's nothing more that you have to do in terms of the installation side. One would think that the ability here to have a universal inbox would actually be very appealing to Exchange administrators and to IT decision makers, and that unified messaging would be deployed pretty heavily across the spectrum. But what we've found is that many are shying away from unified messaging, and it's probably due to a lack of understanding as far as what it does. Within your organization, you probably have a PBX that handles incoming calls, and you probably have a voicemail piece to your setup as well. So with unified messaging services, Microsoft isn't looking for you to throw away your phone system. If you wanted to do that, you could go with a link server. But rather, what we're breaking here is just one little piece of it, the voicemail piece. With unified messaging, if configured properly, you can have voicemails left for end users that can be MP3s or some other audio format, and these can even be transcribed into the email. You can also have incoming fax configured if you have a partner fax server solution with a URI provided by the fax solution provider. So again, unified messaging does not eliminate the need for you to have phone services. It doesn't eliminate the need for you to have a PBX or an IP PBX. Not at all. The only thing we break in the process, and I say break, really, we're not breaking something, we're actually making it better in my opinion. The only thing we break in the process, and we're saying break, but we're not really breaking anything, in fact we're making it better, is the voicemail side to your telephony setup. So voicemails will be left through the unified messaging services right in end user mailboxes. Let's discuss in greater detail some of these unified messaging features. So for starters, we have Outlook Voice Access. With this feature, users can call their inbox to access their voicemail, their email, their calendar, their contacts, and all of this is read to the user with text-to-speech. In addition, there's Voicemail Preview, which uses speech-to-text to take a voicemail and put a preview of it in your inbox. Now what it does is it uses best guess for words it does not understand. The Voicemail Preview side is always a source of solid entertainment when it comes to persons that leave you messages and reading what the voicemail preview actually transcribes. It's typically not what is said in the message itself, so that can lead to some humorous renderings of the voicemail. The good news is your Outlook client and Outlook web app client will show you also the voicemail itself, and so you can play back the voicemail and hear it for yourself. Then there's incoming fax, which again requires a specialized fax vendor that will allow faxes to be sent to your inbox in TIFF format. There's Play on Phone, which allows users to play their voicemails on a phone rather than through their computer speakers. And that makes sense because obviously if you're sitting there at your desk and you want to listen to your voicemail, but now you have to play it on your computer speakers, that may not be what you're looking for there. You may be in a situation with cubicles around you or other individuals that sit near you, and you may not want to listen to your voicemails while others are listening in. So this provides the ability to play back through your phone. And there are auto attendants. Auto attendants are optional, but the value of the auto attendant is that it has a set of default prompts that is automatically configured for the default auto attendant, but you can configure additional auto attendants, and you can establish key mappings so that if a person presses 1, they go to perhaps another auto attendant. So you can have multiple levels of auto attendants, and this can help to organize your company better. It can help to ensure that the person who gets the call is the right person. When it comes to smaller organizations, it can actually make that organization appear larger because there are so many different auto attendants so that a person gets to the right individual in the company or to the right inbox. So you can utilize various auto attendants in this way as well to give the appearance of a larger size for your organization. Now, as mentioned, the goal of unified messaging is not to necessarily replace your existing configuration. So with your existing telephony configuration, what you probably have is the public switch telephone network, your PSTN connections, coming in through trunk lines. And so unlike a home where you might have a single line coming in or multiple lines, let's say for multiple phone connections, with a company, you actually pay for these trunk lines to come in. And you utilize a PBX or an IP-PBX to take advantage of those trunk lines. Now, it's typically not a one-to-one connection. So it's not that you look at the number of phones that you have and then make sure you have that many lines coming in. Actually, with trunk lines, you want to make sure that you have a reasonable percentage ratio so that you look at the number of persons that have lines in the company and you determine what typically takes place in terms of the number of people that will be on the line at any given time. So you don't want to max out your connections. You need to make sure that everybody can get a line when they need to. Regardless, though, all of this goes through a PBX or an IP-PBX. And again, there's typically a voicemail system in play here. So when a person's phone is either busy or perhaps they are not present, and so the phone rings a few times, past a certain point, it shifts the call over to the voicemail system. So that system can be any number of different systems that exist out there. The PBX or IP-PBX knows that if the person is busy or away from their desk, that after a certain number of rings, the call will be forwarded off to the voicemail system. To make this work, your telephony people will have to make sure that your voicemail settings point off towards your Exchange server now. But there may be some hardware considerations that have to be taken into account. So for example, if we look here at a situation where we're using our legacy PBX, but we want to connect to our Exchange server with Unified Messaging Services configured, we're going to need to utilize a voice over IP gateway. And so this is a device that will sort of translate between the PBX and the IP-based network that Exchange is running on. So when you're working with PSTNs and trunk lines and PBXs, we're dealing with a different type of network. We're not dealing with an IP-based network. So this voice over IP gateway would have to be put in place in between the PBX and the Exchange server. If, however, you're using an IP-PBX, then you don't have to use another appliance in between to assist with translation, because it's already being done on the IP-PBX. Now typically, the Exchange administrator, or even the IT department in general, is not responsible for the telephony side to a company. Companies usually hire telephony specialists or a team of specialists to ensure that all of their phone lines are up and running and their voicemail is working and so forth. So this is probably one of the misconceptions about unified messaging that has scared Exchange administrators away from it, and that is that they think that they now have to get into the telephony game, that they have to learn a whole new field. Now, to be honest, you may have to learn a few things, but that's okay, because it's always good to keep your mind moving, learn a few new things. The main focus for you, though, as an Exchange administrator, is going to be on the Exchange side. That's where your focus is. If you're currently using a telephony specialist or a team of specialists, you're going to continue to need them. Remember, we're not eliminating the entire phone system at this point. We're simply making a few changes. We're redirecting where the voicemail goes. And we might make a few additional tweaks to the telephony system. And we may need to establish additional extensions based upon auto attendance and so forth. But this is the kind of thing that telephony specialists should handle. And so hopefully that puts your mind at ease that the main focus for Exchange administrators will be the configuration of the unified messaging services on the Exchange server itself. So let's discuss unified messaging configuration. Obviously, an important part to the process is going to be deploying and configuring telephony components. So we just talked about a few of these things in terms of the PBX and the IP-PBX. Essentially, your telephony team will have to provision PBX lines, organize channels, and deploy voice over IP gateways where necessary. That's not the kind of thing we're going to stress about. We'll let them take care of that. On our end, as Exchange administrators, we're going to configure unified messaging elements, and that includes creating a unified messaging dial plan, creating and configuring your UM/IP gateway, creating and configuring the UM mailbox policy, and creating and configuring the UM auto attendant or auto attendants. Now that part is optional, but it's something that typically you want to utilize because those auto attendants are very helpful, even if you just use one. And then we have to enable users, associate a policy, and configure the user's PIN settings as well. So this is the part that Exchange administrators have to worry about, the unified messaging part and enabling users. Now usually at this point we would jump over to the server and review all of the different settings and then come back to our scenario. But in this case we're going to discuss the scenario first and then jump over to our server, and we'll take the tour at the same time that we do the configuration. And you'll understand why that is in a moment, because as you see, taking the tour actually involves configuring the entire setup. So there's no point in configuring it, deleting it, and then coming back to it. We'll just do the whole thing at the same time. So let's talk about our scenario then and see what we're going to do with unified messaging and Spytech Prime. So for starters, Spytech Prime has put a call out to their telephony personnel. They're going to configure the settings on their end. They'll handle the connection between the PBX and the Unified Messaging Exchange services. So we'll let them handle that. On our end, we're going to move forward and we'll configure the unified messaging elements, and we'll enable two test users, Alicia Harrison and Bethany Hayes. We'll use a 4-digit extension policy, and we'll give them each extensions 2001 and 2002. At the same time, we will explore the various settings along the way. So you'll have an opportunity to see what kind of settings go into the messaging policy itself, what an IP gateway is all about, and what the settings are for that. You'll see that that's actually the easiest part to all of the configuration. We'll talk about the dial plan, we'll talk about the auto attendants, and you'll get a chance to see all of this in the process. Okay, so we have a lot to cover. Let's jump over to our Exchange server and get started. Alright, so here we are on our Exchange server. We'll go over here to our Exchange Admin Center and log in. And from here on the left-hand side in the Exchange Admin Center, we have the Unified Messaging feature right here. Now you can see that we have UM dial plans and UM IP gateways. So to start things off, we're going to create a UM dial plan. Notice it says it defines the format for telephone numbers in your organization. Now, that's not to say that you are going to be defining this format. This is the kind of thing that probably already exists for your organization. So things like extensions for various individuals in the organization, phone lines, and so forth, this is probably already done, already decided, unless you're starting from a greenfield implementation where even the telephony hasn't been installed. This stuff already exists. So you want to work with your telephony team. I can't stress that enough, that you want to work with your team in order to know what the right answers are to some of the questions that you're going to see as we set up the dial plan. Even some of the telephony settings, like how to get an outside line and some of that other information, you're going to need to check in with your telephony specialist or team in order to get that information to put it in properly. And you're going to see that there are a lot of different settings and options. There's no way in this lesson we're going to cover each and every one, nor are we going to even try. Unified messaging is a 5 to 10 hour course in and of itself. So we're not going to deep dive into every single setting and every single situation with unified messaging. We are going to set this up for SpyTech Prime, and we're going to establish a very simple dial plan, a very simple messaging policy, a single auto attendant, and then apply it off to our 2 test recipients. So okay, to get things started, we click the little plus sign. First things first, we have to provide a name. It has to be a unique name in the organization, and it should be something that makes sense. If you have multiple locations, let's say you have 3 different locations, you might want to name the dial plan based upon location, based upon how your telephony is set up with those locations. So a couple of different options there. In our case, we're going to go with our location, and we're going to just call it dial plan. The extension in length, this is something, again, you have to check with your telephony specialist and see what the extension digits are. But in our case, we're going to go with 4 digits. And so an extension might be 2001, 2002, and so forth. The dial plan type, there are 3 different types you can choose from. Telephone extension, E.164, SIP URI. Again, this is something that you need to talk to your team about. In our case, we're going to go with a simple telephone extension. Voice over IP security mode. There are 3 options: SIP secured, secured, and unsecured. For testing purposes, the easiest is unsecured. Audio language. In our case, we have English. We have not installed additional language packs, so there's nothing more to show here. We can install additional language packs to change the language for the dial plan. So for example, if you have a need for Spanish, you can utilize a Spanish language pack and create a dial plan for Spanish. And what this will do is it will allow individuals to leave voicemails in Spanish, and those voicemails will be transcribed through Outlook Voice Preview as well. In addition, the auto attendant will also be in Spanish. So by installing these different language packs, so you can ensure that you meet the needs of various individuals in your organization depending on what their language needs are, by installing additional language packs and then creating dial plans to match those packs. And for the region code, we're going to go with the region code for Trinidad and Tobago, and that is 868. Okay, and that's all we can configure at this point. We click Save, and now we have our dial plan. Now, the interesting thing about unified messaging is you can create these things pretty easily, but notice if we open it up, there's a whole lot more to this. So we can configure the dial plan further if we click Configure. Here you can see we can change the security mode. We have dial codes, and here's where we put in the information like things for dialing outside calls, outside line access, international access codes, and so forth. We have Outlook Voice Access settings. We can change the welcome greeting or the informational announcement. We can change those by adding our own WAV files to the system. We can change settings here like the audio codec. Folks always ask me about this. They say, how do I change the audio codec to be perhaps one of these other options? And so here's how you would do it. Although in all honesty, the MP3 is a pretty nice codec. It makes sure that the files are pretty small. But depending on your system, you may need to change the codec. Here you can see information about the number of sign-in failures before disconnecting, timeouts and retries, and so forth. Again, the audio language. Here we see dialing rules. This allows you to control the types of calls that users can make. Dialing authorization. Again, this comes down to controlling calls, whether or not individuals can call others in the same dial plan, allow calls to any extension. So you can control this a bit. Transfer and search. So this provides the ability for users to transfer calls off to others, or they can leave voice messages without ringing a user's phone. So a couple of extra features here. And all of this comes under the dial plan. Now, we look at that and we say, okay, great, dial plan, I get it. But there's a lot more to the configuration than just the dial plan. You can see here, there's also a mailbox policy. And so this policy gets applied to the end user, to the recipient, when you configure their account. So you can create different policies by clicking the plus sign for different end users. They all might still be under the same dial plan, but you might want to establish different settings depending on the end user, or the group or department that the end user is part of. So let's take a look at some of these settings under Mailbox Policies. If we open this up, this is the default policy, and it's created when we create the dial plan itself. Now we can change the name, we can put a limit on personal greetings in minutes. Notice the various user features. We talked about most of these, and you can see we can turn them on or off in the policy. So if we do not want to allow voicemail preview, we can deselect this. If we don't want to allow play on phone for voicemail, we can deselect this. Notice here, this is where we configure our inbound fax information. So if we have a partner that we can actually specify a URI with, then that would allow the end users to receive incoming faxes. So that's something that you have to set up with a third-party company. It's interesting because with Exchange 2007, Microsoft actually provided the ability to receive inbound faxes within Exchange itself. But there were so many problems with it being built right in that with Exchange 2010 and now 2013, it was decided to shift it off to a partner solution. Over here we can see message text, so you can add custom text to voice, fax, and email messages. So when you enable a user for unified messaging, they get a typical email that just says, hey, you've been enabled for unified messaging. You can change the text for that. You can change the text when a user's Outlook voice access PIN is reset, when a user receives a voice message, and when a user receives a fax message. So you can go with the defaults, or you can make adjustments depending on what your organization would like for it to say. PIN policies are here. The number of digits in a PIN, the default is 6. The PIN recycle count, allow common PIN patterns or not, enforce PIN lifetime, number of days, number of sign-in failures, number of sign-in failures before lockout. So these are all good settings for Outlook voice access PIN policies. Dialing authorization, again, we can set this up on the dial plan, but you can also establish dialing authorization right here on the messaging policy. And then protected voicemail. Notice it says, to help protect private information, you can restrict forwarding and playback of voice messages. So you can implement this on your mailbox policy. Notice you can select none to allow unprotected voice messages, private to let the caller set the protection level, and all to enforce protection. You can also protect voice messages from authenticated callers. Again, none, private, and all. You can say require play on phone for protected voice messages. So all of this is part of the protected voicemail settings in the policy. We click Save. And you'll notice we also have the ability to create a unified messaging auto attendant. We're going to hold off on that for a second because we're going to look down here at hunt groups. Now, a hunt group is something that is a telephony term. It basically comes down to when a person picks up their phone and tries to make a call, being that they don't have a direct line, but instead go through trunk lines, they have to hunt for a line in a sense. And so that's why they're called hunt groups. So really, this is just basically something that you're going to see arrive in a moment when we create a UMIP gateway. Because in creating the gateway, the hunt group will be created automatically. So we'll jump over and create the gateway, then jump back over here. You'll see that there's a hunt group at that point. You can create additional ones if you'd like, although we're not going to at this point. And then we will create an auto attendant as well. So if we swing up to the UMIP Gateways tab, you can see that to configure a gateway, we just click the plus sign. Now, the gateway is a little bit different. The gateway represents a physical session border controller, IP gateway, or IPPBX in Active Directory. So it's a logical representation of something that's actually physical, a physical device on your network. Now, in my case, within a testing scenario like this, I utilize a little audio codes box. You can see this is what it actually looks like. A little fancier than this, of course. It's a physical box that has phone lines plugged into it and so forth. And this is the IP address that I have assigned to the audio codes box. This is great for testing in a non-production environment. It's great for making sure everything is working properly before you deploy on a larger scale. And so we need to note the IP address of the box. We go back up to our settings here. And what we're going to do is we'll call it audio codes. And the address is, as you saw, 192.168 1.1.215. And now we have to associate this UMIP gateway with a dial plan. So that's why we created the dial plan first, because without that we wouldn't be able to create the gateway. So we click Browse. There's our dial plan. We click OK, and then Save. And that's all there is to it. Now if we double click to open this up, unlike messaging policies and dial plans, you don't see a list of things on the left-hand side that now need to be configured. In this case, the name, the IP address, that's good enough. We could establish a forwarding address if necessary to configure our gateway to forward calls to unified messaging using this address. And there are two little settings down here at the bottom. Allow outgoing calls through this UMIP gateway, which if we wanted to stop that, we could just deselect this, and allow message waiting indicator. So we're good to go at this point. We click Save, and then let's return to our UM dial plans. So now when we open up our dial plan, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that now we have the default hunt group for that AudioCodes UMIP gateway. Alright, we're almost there. The last thing that we want to configure is this Auto Attendant. So an auto attendant is what it is. It's a computerized voice that pretty much handles the various requests of the individual that's calling. And in some cases, the auto attendant is voice enabled so that you can actually talk to the auto attendant. You can say one instead of pushing one on your phone. In other cases, the auto attendant simply doesn't understand what you're saying. And that's just typical with auto attendants, that it has to ask you to repeat yourself, and perhaps based upon the way you speak or whether or not you speak too fast, too slow, have an accent, the auto attendant can have problems. So it's good to also establish a fallback auto attendant, one that just uses keypad instead of voice. So if we click the plus sign here for the auto attendant, we can give it a name, and then we can configure the auto attendant as enabled, and then here set the auto attendant to respond to voice commands. So in our case, we want to do that. We could establish an access number so that you can call directly to the auto attendant, but at this time we don't have any of the telephony configured for that, so we're going to leave that blank, and we'll click Save. Seems simple enough. We double click to open that up, and much like the dial plan and the messaging policy, you can see that there are additional settings here. And so if we look here, there are a couple of things you might notice. So one of the things is use this auto attendant when voice commands don't work correctly. So if we wanted to have a fallback auto attendant, we would create one that doesn't use voice commands. So here, let's cancel out of here. Let's click the plus sign. We'll call it the fallback auto attendant. We'll create it as enabled, but we will not set the auto attendant to respond to voice commands. And we'll click Save. And again, we could provide an extension for this auto attendant, a number that someone could call directly. So let's say you know that the voice auto attendant is just going to be annoying and you're going to fall back anyway. You would have the ability to just call directly to the fallback auto attendant. So that's an option. You don't have to do that, but it's just nice to know that we can configure those settings. If we go back into our voice auto attendant, now we can click Browse here and allow the fallback auto attendant to be in place. And so what will happen is, if you have 3 problems with the auto attendant, it will just automatically push you over to the fallback auto attendant, and then you'll have to use your keypad instead of trying to use your voice to get through it. So we have the general information here. We have greetings. And so there's a business hours greeting, a non-business hours greeting, and an informational announcement. All of these can be changed. As far as when business hours are, that's something that you configure. You determine when the business hours are going to be in place. You configure the holiday schedule. And this is nice because every country is different, and so there might be different holidays and different lengths for those holidays. You have menu navigation. And here's where you can specify the menu options offered to callers during business and non-business hours. So you can have different prompts based upon the numbers. It will go to a different message, or it will go to a different mailbox, or will go to a different recipient, perhaps to a different department, depending on what number is chosen. So there's a lot of configuration involved with the auto attendant, but you can see how by working with this, you can create an impressive auto attendant navigation structure through the various settings here. We have address book and operator access, and here this gives some options in terms of searching the address book through the auto attendant and so forth. And then we have dialing authorization. And again, this comes down to control as far as the types of calls to authorize for callers to this auto attendant. Calls in the same dial plan allow calls to any extension. So there's a lot of different options that we have for the auto attendant as well. And again, we are just quickly moving through all of the different settings just so you can see them. But we're not getting into the nitty-gritty details of these, and that's because this is a course in and of itself. So this is just to whet your appetite and get you comfortable with the various setting screens, dialog screens that you see here. And that's because this is a course in and of itself, really. It's not something that can be explained with one lesson. It's really something that requires multiple lessons in order to deep dive into each of these different facets of unified messaging. So at this point, we have our dial plan, we have our mailbox policy, we set up our UMIP gateway, and so we have a hunt group. We have two auto attendants, one that's voice enabled and then a fallback auto attendant. So if we look at this, for the most part, we are configured properly on the Exchange side. That's all there is to it. Obviously, the telephony experts would still need to make sure that their IPPBX or PBX was set up properly, that everything was pointing and redirecting in the right direction when an individual received a busy signal or there was no answer to a call, and so we'll still leave that up to them. So you can see that the Exchange side is not as overwhelming as perhaps you originally thought. And once you have this information here, you can see there are 3 dots. Once you have everything up and running, there are a couple of additional things that you can do. Call statistics, and you can get user call logs. So these are reports that are generated for you. They're done on the fly as you're using the unified messaging services. You can find out how things are going with these little reports. Well, we have unified messaging set up, but we don't have it enabled for our users. So let's jump over to recipients. And we recall that with Alicia Harrison and Bethany Hayes, we're going to enable unified messaging. So here we have Alicia, we click Enable. And the first thing we have to do is choose a mailbox policy. We say OK, and then Next. And here we have to put in her extension. So number of digits is 4. We established that on the dial plan itself. So we're going to give Alicia extension 2001. The PIN settings, we can automatically generate a PIN, and then that 6-digit PIN will be sent to Alicia right in her inbox because she's going to get an email saying that everything's been set up for her here. Automatically generate a PIN, and then she'll get that 6-digit PIN in her inbox because an email will automatically be generated when we complete this process anyway. So if we want, we can let the Exchange server generate the PIN, or we can type in a PIN, and we can require the user to reset their PIN the first time they sign in, and this way we can then use the same PIN for all of our mailboxes because they'll have to change it when they log in for the first time. So we'll leave that checked, and we click Finish. Alright, and so here you can see now her mailbox is enabled for unified messaging. We can click View Details, and from here we can reset the PIN, we can change the mailbox policy, we can put in a personal operator extension, we can click Other Extensions in the event she has additional extensions for her name and for her system. She can have them all go to the same mailbox, so we can do that in here. In our case, Alicia only has the one extension, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll do the same for Bethany. We'll do it a different way. Instead of clicking the link here in the Details pane, we'll go to Mailbox Features, and here you see that same link. Under Phone and Voice Features, we click Enable, and it pretty much takes us right back to the same wizard, the same dialog settings here. We click Browse. We'll choose the messaging policy. We'll give Bethany a different extension. and in this case we'll allow the system to automatically generate the PIN, and then we don't have to require the user to reset the PIN. Or we can. Either way, it's up to us if we want to allow them to reset it themselves to provide for an easier PIN for when they log into their own Outlook voice access. And we click Finish. And then Save. And so we're all set on the Exchange side. We have unified messaging configured. It's a basic configuration. It's something that would really be solid for a lab environment, but obviously you can see that there are additional settings that you can configure, and depending on your telephony setup, you would configure those options differently perhaps, and depending on the security features that you need and so forth. So we have the unified messaging side set up. We now have it enabled for 2 users to test the system, Bethany and Alicia. The only thing we're waiting on is for the telephony folks to get back to us and let us know that the IPPBX or PBX has forwarding enabled for those accounts and has the various auto-attendant accounts set up as well. But as you can see, working with unified messaging, working with dial plans, message policies, auto-attendants, UMIP gateways, this is not rocket science. It may take a little more practice, a little more reading and so forth, but you can learn unified messaging. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, so you didn't think we were going to go before we actually proved that this thing worked, right? Using the AudioCodes Voice over IP gateway, we have 2 phone lines that are set up, one for Alicia, one for Bethany. So what we're going to do is demonstrate a call from Alicia over to Bethany, and what we'll do is we'll check Bethany's mailbox and see how it transcribed and how it worked. And then we'll also sign into Bethany's account through Outlook Voice Access, so you'll have a chance to hear how that works. So I have 2 phones here. One is Alicia's phone with extension 2001, and we're going to dial Bethany's number at extension 2002.
Please leave a message for Bethany Hayes. After the tone, please record your message. When you finish recording, hang up or press the pound key for more options.
Greetings, Bethany. This is J. Peter Brzezzi. I'm happy to leave you a message today. I hope it transcribes it well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Alright, so let's see what it does with my message. We'll go in and we'll log in to the system. Before we do that, let's just show you what happens if we lift up Bethany's phone and we dial her extension directly.
Bethany Hayes. Please enter your PIN, then press the pound key. If this is not your mailbox, press the star key. Welcome to Outlook Voice Access Setup, where first-time users can set up their voice mailbox. Now, let's record your name and personalized greetings. To record your name, press 1. To use the pronunciation of your name provided by Outlook Voice Access, press the star key.
Alright, and so that's enough of a demonstration. You can see that with just a short period of time, we were able to get a fully functional unified messaging system up and running. And you can see what we configured to do that. So even though there's a lot of additional settings that you can configure, it's obvious at this point that it's not as overwhelming and complicated as perhaps some would have you believe. Now let's just jump over to Bethany's system. Let's log in with her account, and let's see how accurate Outlook Voice Preview was when it comes to our message. Sometimes it surprises me that its accuracy is so good. Other times it makes for a funny demo. Let's go find out what it did with this one. Okay, and so here we are on a Windows 8 system logged in as Bethany Hayes. If we go to our desktop, you can see that we already have Outlook 2013 opened. And you can see that here is the email message that Bethany received when we enabled her recipient mailbox for unified messaging. So she was notified what her number is, and also the PIN that the Exchange server gave to her automatically. You remember that we didn't put the PIN in, that we allowed it to automatically assign her the PIN, and so this is what she received. So when she logs in, she's going to change her PIN in order to make it something that's easier for her to remember. Now, here you can see is the message that we left for her. So, okay, let's see how the transcription worked out. Greetings, Bethany. This is JP Numbers Easy. Okay, so we'll give it that. I mean, Brzezzi is pretty difficult to transcribe. I'm happy to leave you a message today. I hope it transcribes it well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. That's not so bad, is it? So the transcription is actually pretty good, and if there was any question as to what this is all about, she can always select it, and notice it goes right to that part of the voicemail itself. So let's say there's a long message that someone leaves. Isn't that often the case where you really just need somebody's number? They call you, they leave you this long message that now you have to listen through, and it's really at the end that the number is there. And then if you don't write it down, you have to listen to the whole message again. Well, the value here is that the number would be right at the end, and even if you weren't sure if it transcribed the number properly, you could always select the number and just play that part of the message so that you can hear the number being given directly. So this is actually pretty good as far as what it's transcribed. It gives the information about who it's from. You can even see up here at the top, play on phone. So that's really the value, again, to unified messaging. It replaces your voicemail system, and it provides all of these additional services. Voicemail preview, you can have play on phone, you can use Outlook Voice Access to call into the auto attendant and have messages read back to you. So this is really a great feature in Exchange 2013. And now that it's built right into the mailbox server itself, so there's really no extra work in terms of having to worry about installing it, it's already installed. Hopefully more administrators will take the chance to work with it, play with it, see if it's something they can actually wrap their mind around without having to worry too much about the telephony side. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.